All right. Well, like I said in my note, happy Thursday. We're now rolling into April 2025. It seems like it's going by like a blur. Let's get into it. Here is the, big chart for the month. The net is, if you saw the email that I sent just before the call, which was really the a bunch of the data for the last call for the book. So for those of you on the call, you already saw it. The trend improved. So it was minus three at six something, I think 368. We're now minus 2.12. So it improved a bit in the back half of the month for Charter overall. Any improvement is always good to see. Obviously, we'd like to see things kind of break out from the pattern we've been in, but so far, haven't seen that happening. And as I said in my note there, I don't think anything's changed in the last 2 weeks. It's just been sort of an unprecedented level of uncertainty with everything in the news cycle right now, and those type things certainly don't help the market. And we also know from decades of experience that the stock market also has an impact. It tends to be a lagging indicator as opposed to a leading indicator. So the stock market has to do poorly for a while before it really hits the charter market, but that certainly isn't helping anything either. Here is the trend when we look at it over, year over year on a percentage basis. We're actually doing better than February and March, so that's good to see. At the minus 2% is better than what we came in February, but you can see that we were below, last year right here by a little bit, and nowhere near the March, what was that, 2022 peak. Here is part 91 trend, and there we're up 1.8%. That's compared to, I believe it was 1.2% at the midpoint of the month. So that also improved, but just as was the case in Charter, it is not in line with the year to date. The year to date trend was 3% for part 91, and just I'll reemphasize, this is 91 and 91K. So the fractional stuff. Here is our year over year chart, and you can see here where it's sort of a stair step, kind of slowly climbing up, not quite back to the peak, but there's our 91 and 91K volume. And then when we look at the combined traffic, slightly up, still up a bit over last year. So that's all good. If you're those of you in the sort of fuel side of the business that really are agnostic to whether it's charter or part 91, you guys on an aggregate, full national level are doing okay. But as we all see when we go airport by airport, it depends on the market you're in, how things are going. So rolling over to size classes, this is charter size class. We don't break those out 91 in this deck. This was the chart, or this is the chart I've been putting in emails. You can see we're off 8.7% here year over year. Light jets are having a tougher first quarter of this year than they did last year. Mid-size, it's been interesting, have definitely been up. They're now even with last year. Well, they're even with last year, and we're doing even better than that. And then super mids, as I've been saying right along, I think everybody knows it and feels it. I mean, these Challenger 300, 350s and the Praetors are super popular with the market right now, and up 6.4%. Year to date, that's versus 5% first half of the month. So that improved in the back half, and not quite what we were seeing in the first part of the year. Some of this, though, is just, we have this huge spike over the holiday, and it's going to be hard to beat that until we get to the holiday later in the year. So here's large cabin. Also, same kind of deal. This one, though, if you'll note, is actually beating its year-to-date trend. So the back half, and this was not the case in the first half of the month. So second half of the month, large cabin sort of broke away. Interesting to note that. And then we're not seeing anything like new here. The turboprops have been having a worst year of any size class, and that's not changing. So we go to our major metro markets. Here's LA. For the airlines, chugging along with a 2% plus increase, really 2.7 for the month to date. When we pull out the airlines and look at GA, we do have a bump here. So some of this, I think, is folks that are connecting with international flights. We see that out of JFK as well. And some of it is people traveling into meetings in downtown LA. But in any case, this is up over last year, which is an interesting contrast to Van Nuys, which, while it's doing better, we were at minus 6.8% in the first half of the month. We're at minus 5.3, so it's kind of closing in and improving. We still are nowhere near last year's numbers for Van Nuys. And here is LaGuardia. As I say every time we go over this, there really is no private jet. I mean, I won't say no, but there's such a small amount of private jet activity here. We don't even bother breaking it out, but it's a good indicator of the overall airline market in New York. And we can see there that that's also up about 2%, which is similar to LA. When we go look at Teterboro, dampened a little bit. This was up more in the first half of the month. So Teterboro had a spike in the first half of the month, and it's not so much that we had peaks that weren't there. It's that the troughs here, the drops are not as strong as what we saw last year. And still, I'd say up 3.9% with everything else going on. It's pretty darn good. And we've got some very, very busy days there in Teterboro. White Plains off 0.2%, so a slightly different story. That also changed. White Plains was ahead of the game halfway through the month, so it was a weaker last half of the month in White Plains. And then here is Farmingdale that almost came in. This is a better second half than the first half of the month, and getting close to the 8.4% year-to-date average there. When we look at Morristown, the last airport we track in the broader New York market, Morristown was off for the month, off 5.1%. So we roll over to the middle of the country, to the Windy City. We are off 5.9%. And that compares to 5.3% year-to-date, so a little bit weaker, but this is before we pull out the airlines. So this is heavily Southwest. We pull out the Southwest, different trend, up 3.6% and beating the year-to-date of 0.7. So this is one of the better performing airports we've looked at in this deck so far. Then we look at Chicago Exec, Palwaukee, the suburban airport we track for Chicago, and it's kind of the opposite story, off 2% compared to 3.5% bump year to date. Going down to the southeast in Atlanta, this is another one of our airline airports. This includes all traffic, showing a 5% increase. When we pull out the airlines, we see that this airport is not super heavy on the GA side, 20 to 40 flights a month, and we are trending 6% down month to date. Here is Peachtree DeKalb, which is the most popular bizav airport in the Atlanta metro area, and it is doing better. It's an improving trend, 3.1% against a 2.6% year-to-date number. So that's good for that market overall. And it's just, you can notice how many more bizav flights you see into PDK than we do into Atlanta proper. Going up to Boston, this is Boston with all traffic. There's just a significant bump in overall volume out of Boston here. I mean, now it's consistently over 1,000 flights a day, which was not the case just even a few years ago. And here's Boston on the GA side, also continuing its strong trend. We're up 2.8% for the month, which is decent. It is below the 5.4% year-to-date average, but still holding its own. Here is Bedford Hanscom, the bizav airport in the suburban part of the Boston market, and not having such a hot month. They're off by 5.4%. So it's always interesting when you see Logan, the downtown airport, doing different than the suburban airport within the same market. We saw the same thing there in Chicago. Here's Reagan, which has, again, virtually no GA traffic, but it's just interesting to track overall, showing up 3.1%. uh, for the month. And then Dulles, which has an awful lot of the GA traffic for the market. And this is showing all traffic, so all the international, everything going in there. You see that with these international airports, we got a different trajectory than the domestic ones that all dropped flights on Saturday. When we pull out the airlines and just show GA, you can see everybody wants to be in and out of DC. I mean, we've seen that all year. So we've got 21.5% bump year to date, 18.8% bump for the month of March. Then here is Manassas, which is still in the DC market. So the trend is carrying over to Manassas with traffic up 20%. Of course, over here we can see that the volume levels are lower at Manassas than they are at Dulles. Here's Charlotte, banking capital of the US. This is with the very heavy American Airlines traffic that's in there. Their traffic is up a bit. When we pull out the American, well, really all airline stuff and just look at the GA, also still strong, up 3.6%. So good performance, not fantastic when compared to the 8.6 they were doing earlier, but still, not bad. Getting into our second home city stuff, here is West Hampton. I mean, we are so out of season that the volumes gets hidden behind our sort of summary chart there. So we won't spend a lot of time on that. This is just not the time of year for the Hamptons. Here is Aspen, which is getting to the end of the season. As we can see, the volume is about to drop off a cliff and is, starting to, but we like to look at it on a relative basis, and looking at it that way, we're 5.8% ahead of last year, and that compares with 6.2% on the year-to-date basis. So things are okay there in Aspen. That was with the airlines. Sorry, there are a few of these I do that with. It doesn't really change the trend much. The GA traffic dwarfs the airline traffic out of Aspen. At some point, maybe we'll even pull it out because it's not that big of a deal. Here's the same thing for Eagle, and I will just skip past the airline stuff. So Eagle is really seeing the end of the season earlier, where Aspen has not. A lot of time that's driven by events and other things that the various mountains are doing to drive traffic in there. And so for the month of March, Eagle did not do as well as Aspen and is 5.4% below last year. However, the season as a whole has not been bad since they're up 2% for the year to date. Then here is Denver, which really isn't a second home city per se, but it's close to all the mountains, so we tend to kind of lump it together, and you can see Denver's up 5.1%, so doing very well. And this is a little bit of a trend where we're seeing these airports that are close to downtown areas tend to be doing well, right? We saw that for Chicago, we saw it for Boston, we saw it for New York, and we're seeing it for Denver. Here's Nantucket, same story as the Hamptons, not in season. That also follows with Martha's Vineyard, so we don't really worry about those guys right now. Here is Napa, which is more of a four-season type destination, up 4% for the year, so doing a little better than the year-to-date trend. And here is Bandon Dunes, beating their year-to-date trend, up 7.4%. So golf up there in Oregon has been popular. Here is Scottsdale, pretty much on par with their year-to-date number, and doing as well as ever out there. The weather cooperates, and it's still becoming, I think a more and more popular place for folks to fly privately. Here's Jackson Hole, strong into the season, much stronger than Eagle for one reason or another, right? Up 7.7% year over year for the month of March, which is slightly less than the 11.5% year to date, but that's still, good performance for Jackson Hole. Here is Hilton Head, and Hilton Head has had its ups and downs. Right now, it's definitely on and up 12.3% on a month-to-date basis, which is more than double the 5.5% increase for the year-to-date. So really strong performance this month of March for Hilton Head. Going to our bucket we call other cities, we get into Dallas and the Addison Airport, one of the satellite airports there, off 1.4%. Dallas Love, which is one of the top 5 bizav airports in the country. This includes airline traffic. when we pull out the airline traffic, just barely eking it out ahead of last year, up 0.1%. But look at the flight counts here compared to some of the other airports, right? So, I mean, our Teterboro can get into the 600 flight a day range, but these guys are up there in 2 to 300 flights a day. Here is Opelika. We're getting down into Florida. So Opelika is one of the Miami metro airports and one of the fastest growing bizav airports in Florida, I think due in large part for how well Fontainebleau does down there, up 3.4%, which is slightly below the 5.2% year-to-date trend. Fort Lauderdale International, including the airlines, is off just slightly. When we yank the airlines out of there, it's a completely different story. We've had a lot of spiky stuff in there. Now, part of this, if we were to really correlate it, and when we look at West Palm and see the presidential TFRs, well, this is one of the airports that's benefiting from that. So some of these spikes line up directly with when it is difficult to get into West Palm. Here's Fort Lauderdale exec. And you can see there was some runway construction in there that hit those numbers. And that was at the beginning of the month, and the month hasn't recovered really from that. So we're off 9.4% for the whole month. It was, if we look at the last week, you can see that we were slightly above last year. Now, going to the other side, to the Gulf of Mexico, we are 1.8% ahead of last year. That is lower than the year-to-date trend. When we look at this red, which is this year, you can see that we were kind of ahead of the gray. Most of the time, we've had a few days here where that was not the case. That's kind of eating into the gain we had there. And then here is West Palm. With the airlines, you can see that there's an impact from these presidential TFRs. When you yank out the airlines, which managed to get around some of that stuff, you can see that it really has a significant impact on those days. And volume is off 25% for this month due to predominantly presidential TFRs, and that's 16% for the year. There's nothing I see that's going to change that in the near term. It's just something you got to watch if you're flying folks in and out of there. And that is the last. Oh, no, it's not. We have one more. Nassau on the GA side. So this is now updated to be the GA chart. You can see that's pretty decent GA traffic in there, 150 flights a day, roughly. But for the month of March, it did not get the spike that it did last year here. So we're at 2.7% below, but still pretty healthy traffic levels. I mean, we're talking 4,300, 4,400 flights in a monthly period. That's nothing to shake a stick at. Looking at our top 50 routes, we're going to bounce down to the most recent 2-week period here. So here is the back half of the month of March. You can see it's been strengthening for the past 3 weeks. So in the top 50 OD pairs, we've had more concentration. There's almost 1,000 flights. That's about as high as this gets, which is up 4.9% from the first half of the month. No big surprises in here. We really have the north-south corridor in full swing. And all that orange is Florida, so you can see it all over the place. And if there's anything that is a little different than last year, it is looks to me like Bahamas are more popular. The number of times you see MYNN Nassau on here is definitely increasing, and you can see it's both folks hopping over to Nassau from the mainland and coming from places like Teterboro. So interesting to see that. But now, when we look at fuel, let me get to the most recent week here. Oh, that was it. So green price of fuel just went down, and in some cases, fairly significantly. New Hampshire here went down 34 cents a gallon on average. That's pretty big. New Mexico, 23 cents. And really, there wasn't anywhere that, well, I should say Alaska, it increased by 3 cents. Everywhere else, we saw a decrease, though. And then here is just the national chart there. No big changes there if you've been following along with these things over time. The deep blue means more expensive, and Alaska, Colorado, and Rhode Island continue to take the cake. That said, the average prices across the board are not where they were at this time last year. Volume has, or prices have come down sort of overall from what we were seeing in the past. So that wraps the deck here for this week. As you all know, I am happy to go back and revisit the deck and or answer uh, questions. Craig, I see that you're curious to see the first slide again. Happy to do that. So we'll just rewind and story. I don't know if anyone else has a question. Sometimes we have folks that ask questions of the group. You can fire something into the chat channel or unmute yourself if you have a question on anything. I'm happy to go back to another chart if you wish. So here you go, Craig. 2.12%. This was better on a year-over-year basis than last year, but obviously we wish that it was up year over year. So that's kind of where we're at. So if there's an airport or anything you'd like to see again, or anything you're curious about, we got a decent group of folks on here who can chime in or answer a comment. If not, we can call it a wrap for this week. Next call will be, let's see, it's going to be April. I want to make sure I get the date right, but it's going to be 2 weeks from today. The timing works out, and that should be April 17th. So on the 17th, we'll be able to do the first half of April and see how that's working out.
Hey Greg, we were just on a call with NBAA about the new tariffs that are coming into effect this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And they did say that Canadian Jet A, any Jet A that comes from Canada will apply the 10% tariff.
Well, so I guess the interesting thing there, and I know we have some fuel guys on this call that might be able to comment on that, is like, how do what FBOs would be supplied with Canadian fuel and how would you know?
Yeah, that's why I brought it up. I wondered if anyone on the call could help.
Yeah. Don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to anyway. Like Ronnie and Shah, like,
Well, that's going to be an interesting challenge. I don't necessarily know that there's a good mechanism to do that yet, and or to track that at the FBO level. I mean, there probably are some FBOs that are getting bulk loads from, Canadian supply or from Canada, so that may be easier to do at the FBO level, but certainly not on an uplift level. Like, yeah. Well, that's a curveball. We'll have to figure it out.
right. I mean, my understanding is that there's a bunch of fuel that gets um, shipped either by tanker or pipeline, right, from Canada into the US. So that's going to find itself into, I mean, I guess certain terminals, but could be blended with stuff that has other sources. So how to figure out what percentage of the fuel had a Canadian tariff on it could be fun for those oil companies.
Yeah, and it could make a difference in, supply to an FBO that they're getting their supply from, Canada versus US. So it could make US, suppliers more competitive.
Right. Well, my understanding on the Eastern Seaboard is Irving Oil has a refinery right up in the maritime provinces, I think. So that could have an impact on East Coast
Yep.
if there isn't alternative or aren't alternative sources there.
Yeah, Irving supplies a lot of fuel in the Northeast.
Yep. So that might be where we see it most.
Yep.
I have to believe that, well, yeah, I don't know of anybody that's refining out in like the Western, like Vancouver, British Columbia area, right? But I am aware of Irving on the East Coast.
Yeah, nothing comes to mind.
Yeah. Well, great question, Jen, as always.
I just appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
You bet. Anybody have anything else? I mean, I'm the tariffs as they roll out, I know are going to affect everything like, aircraft parts and things like that, PT6 engines. I think a lot of the parts come from Canada for anybody doing turboprop stuff, right? And then anything to do with Bombardier, that's those popular Challenger 300s and 3500s and 350s all need parts from Canada. That could be interesting. I wonder if anybody like tried to preempt that and get parts into the US in advance of any of this stuff getting announced. Interesting to see.
Yeah, so they were saying even if you were buying an aircraft and you had it signed by this weekend, the aircraft actually needs to be in the US. It doesn't matter when it's signed, it matters when it got here.
The delivery date. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm. So is there going to be a wave of like whitetail planes that aren't quite completed jumping over the border?
Yeah, I don't know. It was crazy. And they were also saying that you could find someone to find parts of the aircraft that were part that had US parts. So that part wouldn't be tariffed, but the rest of the plane, like parting it out almost. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Wow. Yep. Going to be interesting to see how all this stuff shakes out, right? I mean, I think it'll be interesting in the auto side of things too, because I don't, I think a lot of the parts in US autos come from Canada and Mexico. So it's not like a US car is actually 100% built in the US. So all this stuff's going to get complicated, right? I mean,
Actually, that was on the call. They asked if there was any aircraft that was 100% US made. We should have done that as a survey question. What do you think, Greg?
no, I don't think there's any plane that's 100% US made.
You're correct. Yeah, no. Nope.
Yeah. Right, I wouldn't have thought that. I mean, even Gulfstream and Cessna and like even on the small end, I think everybody's using some part they got internationally. Interesting stuff. All right, well then, if there's nothing else, thanks for bringing that up, Jen. We'll talk again on the 17th, and we'll see how the first half of April looks.
Have a good day.
Yep, thanks everyone. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, guys.